Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to today's panel discussion, Success is Planned, Set Intentions for Your 2022 Career. My name is Tony Dupel. I'm a member of ISPE's Women in Pharma Committee here in Boston, and I am also chair of the Programs Committee for Women in Bio. So I'm really excited to get these three organizations together along with Women Accelerators, and I'm really excited to also facilitate today's discussion. Before we get started, hold on, let me just make sure that these slides are going. First off, I'd like to thank our program sponsor, Elemental Machines. And with that, I'd also like to give a special shout out to Brooke at Elemental for helping pull together this amazing event. Secondly, I'd like to thank our co-hosting organizations, which I mentioned, Women Accelerators and Women in Bio. If you want to learn more about them, we will be dropping their websites in the chat box, so you'll be able to go to their websites and learn a little bit more about them. You will have the opportunity at the end of the panel. We're going to be compiling questions as we go along, so feel free to pop them in the chat. We will compile them at the end and go through them and ask, but also we will be doing breakout rooms with each of the panelists, so feel free to save some of those questions if you want to ask something more personal with the panelists individually. All right, and lastly, we hope you'll continue the conversation on the chapter's social media platforms such as LinkedIn. And now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Joanne Kamins, PhD. Dr. Kamins received her PhD in genetics from Harvard Medical School in genetics. She has had a varied career in academia, pharma, biotech, and nonprofit. She is currently serving as the interim executive director of Bentley University's Center for Women in Business. And for a decade, she was executive director of the nonprofit biotech AdGene. Dr. Kamins has been advancing diversity and inclusion for decades, including as founder of the Boston chapter of the Association for Women in Science, MASS AWIS. And she consults and speaks widely on topics such as culture roadmaps for startups, implicit bias, management excellence, and making the most of mentoring relationships. She also guides science trainees and companies in the establishment of successful mentoring programs. Next speaker is Jane Matson. Jane is an author, career coach, and speaker in her own business. She has worked in the career management field in outplacement and higher education for over 20 years, coaching early, mid, and late career professionals through a successful career transition and college students as they enter the job market. A skilled facilitator and inspirational speaker, Jane speaks frequently on topics that include building your confidence for career success and understanding corporate culture before you accept a job offer. Jane recently authored a book on how to build relationships titled You, You, Me, You, The Art of Talking to People, Networking, and Building Relationships. She speaks to groups on how to use her framework of You, You, Me, You to develop and enhance relationships in building their business and career. And last but not least, we have Juliette Williams, PhD. Juliette Williams is currently Senior VP of Biology at Chimera Therapeutics, a small biotech and lead player in protein degradation. I'm going to butcher that. Previous to Chimera, Juliette worked at Novartis, leading biology and small molecule drug discovery, and she's been a drug hunter now for over 20 years with additional experience at other companies, including Sanofi, Millennium, and Curis. Juliette did a PhD in developmental biology at the University College London and her undergraduate degree majoring in biochemistry at Cambridge University. I guess we'll keep it to that. All right, let's dive right into it, shall we? So over the past couple of years, we've seen a tremendous change in the world and workplace. What advice would you give someone planning for success in 2022? And what actions can be taken now, and what pitfalls would you try to avoid? I guess we'll start with Jane.
So the 2022, first of all, before you even think of what do you want to do for 2022, I'm a firm believer in assessing where have you been. So before we can move forward, we have to really think of what did we do well this past year? What did we learn? What are more of the things that we want to continue to develop and grow? So, and with that said, then you can really identify what are some of the things you need to move forward. One, clearly, you know, with this world of hybrid, world of work that we're going to be working in, that part of it is how do we still maintain relationships? And it isn't just relationships of just getting to know one, but it's the relationships that you have with your current management up all levels of the organization. I was on a call today with someone, and she was talking about how she loves to work at home and doesn't care to go back to work. And she's an early career professional. And, you know, we talked about the challenge of just being alone. You don't get that career visibility. So the action you take, I think, Tony, that is an extremely powerful word. There's got to be action. And the action today is whether it's like you're going to be taking a class, whether you're going to be listening to a podcast, whether you're going to be reading a book, or whether you're really just going to be doing some networking like we're going to be doing today, on having conversations with people to share what exactly are people up to, what are some of the challenges, and understanding what's going on in your own organization. But the most important thing as well is understanding what's going on in others' organization. So I would say that your intention needs to be internal to the organization, but also external to the organization.
Awesome. Joanne, would you like to follow up with that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good, Jane's great. She obviously thought about I guess for me, it's the getting engaged part in an outside world. So the remote challenges are even bigger than it was before to meet people outside your place of work. And for me, that network has always been the source of all good in my life. For me, I was involved in founding AWIS. That was the start of my network. You know, some 25 years ago, I got involved in HBA. I directed the mentoring program. I helped a lot of people, and I gained a lot of currency that way in the networking world. So I would say even more so now that we're remote, it's volunteer, get involved. I would say go deep, don't go wide. So instead of going to events from 20 organizations, I would say pick an organization and go deep, get involved, be on a committee, chair a committee, be on the board, because those relationships are going to actually give you opportunities in the future. And in fact, I have had some of my volunteer relationships turn into references, turn into bosses. One of my HBA co-mentors became my boss at one point, and she was a great boss. You know, I think that it's much easier to network when you have a purpose. So we tell everybody to network, and it feels a little goofy. I mean, you can get on Zoom and have coffee with somebody, but actually doing a project together, like running this panel or, you know, whatever your programming you're doing or development, to me, those are the most authentic relationships that actually go somewhere. So that's my way of dealing with the pandemic, is stay involved.
Absolutely. Juliet, do you think there's any steps that could be taken now for next year, or any pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, I mean, for thinking about success in 2022, you know, the first thing I would do is ask yourself, you know, what are you learning? How are you actually increasing your skill sets? You know, are you investing in yourself? Someone once said to me, you are your best investment. And if you feel you're not investing in yourself, get yourself into a position where you are. And that can be internally within the company you're working with, or externally. And I would ask people for feedback. You work with a lot of people, and asking the same person for feedback will probably annoy them a lot, but you can ask people for feedback continuously as long as it's different people. And if you're hearing the same things and the same themes, you know, work on that feedback. I'm also a big advocate of finding mentors, having great mentors, and find a mentor who's not going to tell you you're doing everything right. You know, find a mentor that you think is going to tell you, actually, you could do this a bit differently. So find a mentor that's actually not like yourself.
Right, challenges you a bit.
And then the other thing I would say, which resonates, I think, with Joanne and Jane, is, networking. Network internally in your organization and externally. And don't burn bridges, because the network in a specialized profession is very small. Everybody knows everybody.
Right.
And finally, I think, especially with the pandemic, people have been moving jobs a lot. And I would say, if you're not happy with your job for a long, sustained period of time, I would say get another job, because if you're not happy, you won't be successful.
But I think we should define long, sustained period of time.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to stay too long in a very bad job, because it's like, it just sucks the soul out of you. So if a job is bad, do not be afraid of change. Change is excellent. And it's a little scary, but once you jump, it's the best, because that first thing in the new job is the honeymoon period, right? So, and that's super fun. So I would say, do not wait it out for years and years. Keep thinking it's going to get better. And that's why companies are starting to focus on culture and inclusion, because all of a sudden people woke up and said, pandemic, life is terrible. Why should work be terrible too? That's crazy, and they're just jumping ship left and right. So employers have responsibility to buckle down. And I am starting to see a lot of interest from companies in starting mentoring programs and supporting that as one way to start getting to a more inclusive and better culture. So I would say, yes, sustained period of time, but don't wait too long. Have your resume ready.
Yeah, that actually kind of brings us into our next question. Adaptability, flexibility, and resilience, all important concepts that have been at the forefront the past few years for many reasons. Joanne, how do you sustain your resilience, and how does it influence planning for success in the future?
Yeah, I guess, I just heard Stacey Abrams talk today, and she just said one genius thing after another. And she said how hard it was during her campaign. Like awful people were talking to her and saying terrible things about her. And at one point she took a step back, just like a week, and she just like hibernated. She felt awful. And then she just said, but I can't, I have to, okay, I've done that now. I felt awful. I've been upset. I'm angry, and I've worked that through. And now I'm going to channel that into action. And so I think I've made terrible mistakes in my career. I've been incompetent at things. I have failed miserably at some tasks, but I have also had a lot of success. And so I think resilience is just about embracing the pain and then moving on, because there will be good things to come, and we will all make mistakes. And we will all have things go awry in some situations. So I don't think I'm so resilient. Maybe I'm just more stubborn, is more.
Awesome. Juliet, the same question about resilience.
About resilience, yeah. I mean, I would advise to push through periods of, stress and unhappiness, as long as they're short term, right? And this goes back to what we were discussing earlier. If those periods of unhappiness and stress are long and maintained, that's really detrimental. But you have to accept that in a job, it's not always going to be flowers and roses and smelling sweet. So, you have to be resilient and push through those periods, actually be stronger than you were before. But again, if it carries on, then don't stay in the job, move somewhere else. And again, the pandemic has highlighted that, with people changing jobs
right,
much more quickly. And then, on flexibility, I mean, in today's environment, because of the pandemic, there are many more opportunities to work remotely. So you can look for and find jobs where you don't live much more easily, especially if it's a desk job. But I would like to say, if you do live reasonably close to the office and can come in, and certainly at Chimera, we're all in, I do think it's important to spend time in the office, because that's where you create and make real relationships. And I do think it's important for the working environment and culture of an organization to create that robust sense of belonging. And you can also make those swift decisions in corridor setting, which you can't do over Zoom fatigue. So I think we're going to have this balance of people working remotely but coming into the office when they can. And if they live close, they come in more than not come in, I would say.
Great. And Jane, how do you think resilience plays into planning for success in 2022?
Yeah, I love that question. As I listened to Joanne and Juliet, all of that, so valid and so right on. And I take maybe a little bit different take on the adaptability, resilient, and flexible, that over the past year, almost everybody has had to do that, adaptable, flexible, resilient, but maybe they weren't as resilient as they really wanted to be, but the companies have stretched that. So I think that word flexible, adaptable has actually gone way too wide. And now hopefully we're going to come back, and now we're going to say you want to be adaptable and flexible. The resilience, I believe, comes into a lot too about self-care. I'm a big proponent of you as the individual. The most important thing that you can do as an individual, but also with your career, is practice self-care. Because when you are caring for yourself, then the resilience comes easier, because you're fueling yourself more than you're fueling the company. And also I see this adaptability, flexibility, and the resilience with your confidence level. Because with the adaptability, that you've had to learn something new. And I bet you many people on the call today have been stretched. And I speculate that many of you have learned something that you didn't even think you could even possibly do. And so that sort of increased your confidence level. So with this adaptable, flexible resilience, take from what you have learned and say, okay, we don't want to be so adaptable that we're giving ourselves too much away. We don't want to do that, because then that way you're giving more to the company you are to yourself. So I think for 2022, we want to keep those words and keep those traits that we have, but also make sure that we're not taking it too far, that you are once again losing sight of yourself, because the self-care becomes the important thing. And we want to present ourselves with the best part of ourselves as possible.
Yeah, setting boundaries can be very healthy.
Absolutely.
For sure. Okay, great. On to the next question. What is any of your secrets to pushing through the bad times? So if you've hit a speed bump in your career, what have you done to kind of push through that? And then also on the opposite side of that, what do you do when you reach a career milestone besides maybe a happy dance? Juliet, we'll start with you.
I just always think to myself, when I'm pushing through periods of stress and unhappiness, it's not going to be constant. So that's just one thing I just keep in my head all the time. This is just, this is life. This is going to happen, but it's just a period of time. Again, we go back, if it's not just a short period of time, then it's time to leave a job. But that's probably the main trick I use. And, if there's a lot going on and it feels overwhelming, another thing I do as a trick is, I guess I compartmentalize everything going on and just think about those small little bits to chew off and bite and work with. And then I'll move on to the next one. And I just keep going like that. And I know that I will get through all the pieces of pizza, if you like. What do I do when I reach a milestone? I celebrate, go out for dinner, buy something nice, so I'll have something to remind myself. And those are the big milestones. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome. Jane, we'll shoot over to you.
Yeah, so Juliet, you and I could be great buddies, because
you like celebrating.
Yes, exactly. I am a big person of acknowledgement. So when you asked about the things that didn't go well, I am a big believer in you are allowed to wallow in self-pity, because I think that is really important, that when we don't achieve something that we work so hard for and we don't get it, you gotta acknowledge it. You gotta feel it. You've got to let it just kind of go through and just mourn, whatever that looked like. But as I say, you just don't want to stay there too long. That's the key. It's all about, is it a day's worth? Is it 2 days worth? Is it a week worth? No, it's probably not a week worth. So I'm a big believer in acknowledgement. Also, what has what has really helped me through any of times that I have never, if I haven't achieved a goal. At a very young age, I developed a love, which I'm sure many people did, of Abraham Lincoln. He's just, you know, I'm well known for Abe, who I just loved. And one of the reasons why he was one of my heroes is he never gave up, never, never, never gave up. And so I always, anytime I didn't work on something, it's sort of, I thought of Abe, that if he didn't give up, I didn't give up. So it was that inspiration that I had that always, always kept me. And I always, every knock is a boost. So I guess it's about an attitude and the way I live my life. And then the successes, most definitely the same. You want to succeed, you want to celebrate. Juliet, like you, I can probably tell you all the things that I have. I bought this because I got this job. I bought this because I did this, because I'm a big, you know, soft heart where I want to remember things. But I think the acknowledgement of I didn't do well and the acknowledgement I did well is so, so important. So those are the things that I do.
Awesome. Joanne, how do you push through and celebrate?
I guess for me, it's more about my posse of mentors, you know. So when I like to talk about, I'm a talker. So I want to talk about it and get it off my chest. I don't want to internalize it. That's just me. It's not for everybody. So I want to call all my mentors and say, oh, I messed up. And I want to hear them tell me, it's okay, Joanne, you know, like, so I like to reach out to people, and the more you tell the story, at least for me, let me speak for myself, the more I tell the story, it diffuses it. It tends to diffuse it for me. And so when I mess up, I kind of like to just say I messed up, like, oh, what, you know, and, you know, almost all those things have passed and I've been able to move on. Maybe something different, maybe opportunities have changed, but yeah. And as far as celebration, same thing. I love to celebrate other people's successes, and I'm blessed to have a lifetime of mentors and friends and colleagues that we've celebrated together, we've mourned together, you know, so for me, the discussion of it diffuses it.
Absolutely. On to our next question. We talked about culture kind of for a second, but to kind of circle back to that, how important do you think culture is within the organization in achieving your success? Joe, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this long before it was cool. You know, it is everything, because your people are everything. You know, I went through this phase in the work world where people were FTEs, like they were a piece of equipment. You know, you had a printer, you had a centrifuge, you had 7 FTEs, you know, and that's just not how people are. They're individuals with unique needs. Fair is not fair for everyone. There's nothing that's going to be, no benefit that's going to serve every person. There's no approach that's going to work for every person. So for me, it's all about making, and also turnover for any organization is deadly, demoralizing, and slows down everything. So if you can't keep your people, if you have turnover and your culture doesn't lend itself to one where people are sticky, where they want to stay because they feel well treated, educated, progressing, fairness, inclusivity, and equity, they're just going to go somewhere else and look for that, right? Eventually. And so for me, it is 100%. You can't get anything done in any organization. There is no robot that is going to replace all your people. And so for me, it is 100%. I mean, when I was at Agene, I spent 10 years, I'm a geneticist, but I basically spent 10 years figuring out what was the right culture that we needed to keep our people engaged, you know, developing themselves and feeling that they were treated with equity. And it was very successful. You know, it worked. We got a lot done with a little resources because people had that strength in their culture. So employers that think, I mean, they can push through without, and also I find the CEOs, some of them that I work with that are just starting this journey, they think they can fool people. So I'll tell you, I'll just tell one story about that. When I was way back in a pharma company, I spent maybe 2 years trying to get a 300 square foot closet turned into a room where women could express breast milk. because there was only bathroom, and all of our offices had windows, and we were not allowed to cover the windows. That was a rule. No posters, no curtains, no blinds. So the only place that you could go use your pump was in the bathroom. And we had 700 employees, something like that, and there was no place. So I went on this quest to make this unused closet, get a sink in there and and I couldn't do it. It was, oh, it's so complicated. It's so hard. We have a processing plant in the back, but we can't figure out how to get a sink in here. And we're not sure whose space it is. And I mean, literally it was ridiculous, right? And then the company was named Best Place to Work by Working Mother magazine, one of the top 50 or something. And they called me because I was the head of the women's initiative at the company. It asked me if I would be a spokesperson if the media contacted us about and I said, I don't think you want me to be your spokesperson, because really that's a bunch of hooey. We know that our pay isn't equitable. I've talked to my colleagues. I know what they make. I know that promotion isn't equitable, and you can't make a 300 square foot closet into a nursing room. Like, you can't fool me. I'm not that dumb, right? So I think it's been true for a long time, but maybe leadership is finally realizing you can't just talk the talk. You got to make the change. You got to walk the walk. And so strong feelings, happy to talk to anybody else about cultural errors if they want.
I'm sure there's plenty. Jane, I saw your face kind of light up when I asked this question, so we'll hand it over to you.
Was it that obvious? So Joanne, I love, boy, you're a company that people would want to work for because you get the culture part. But yeah, Tony, you've hit on a definite, one of my passion topics as a career consultant. On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it for you as the employee to work in the best culture that's a fit for you with the 10? And the reason being is that the culture allows us to do our best work. It allows us to take on projects. It allows us to work with the best people. And in the interview process, of course, we all know that you're going to be asked questions about culture. You may not know they're about culture, but you are the person. So if anybody's on this call is thinking of making a shift because of the fact that you want to find a culture that fits in more with your value system, number one, you want to clearly know what is your value system, what is real important as you move into the next job. And if it's really important to you, then it's all about developing the right questions. So Tony, when my face lit up, it's more of when people ask questions, they ask similar questions of, can you describe the culture? Well, I'm going to describe the culture what I think it is, or I might describe it what I want it to be. And I am a believer that the questions that people ask in an interview need to be behavioral interview questions. We get asked it as someone who's applying for a job, and you have every right to ask those same questions. So as an example, like recognition is a real important value of mine. And so I would want to know, so I would say to Joanne, Joanne, how are you on recognition? And Joanne could say, well, no, I'm a really big proponent of it. And I'll say, great, I'm glad to hear that. Can you give me an example of the last 2 times that you recognized one of your employees, and what did that look like? And if Joanne has to think and can't give me an answer, then there's a red flag. Does she really give the recognition? So the culture important is real important. And I've actually done a blog on it, and I teach a workshop on it of how to understand corporate culture before you get hired. So that's my take on corporate culture.
What's funny is I found with managers, some of the managers I've worked with are great at giving, suggestions for improvement. And some of them are really good at doing the thank you and the recognition, and they don't go hand in hand. And so it's sometimes I have to teach people how to say thank you and how to, when to go that little extra mile for recognition, almost like it's a burden. And I'm like, that's the fun part, like, how do we make that fun for you?
Yes.
There's actually a meme going around the internet about job interviews and how, when you're applying for a job, you're supposed to have 3 references. And it's like, well, I should be getting 3 references from you to make sure that all your employees are happy and getting the real scoop on how it is.
That and Tony, and that's really where you want to be. As far as real, the old, well, I'm interviewing you. It's true, but what I have discovered in my work is that so many people lack the confidence and the courage to ask some of those more difficult questions. And maybe we can talk about that in one of the breakout rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. Juliet, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think obviously culture is incredibly important in achieving success. Success occurs when you're doing something that you fundamentally love and are passionate about. But next, you have to do it in the context of an environment which is fun and supportive. That's just your fundamental happiness. And thirdly, then part of that culture needs to be nurturing and opportunities, or you'll get bored and you'll stop investing in yourself. I changed jobs 6 months ago during the pandemic, and before I took this job, I said, I need to come in and see the place. I need to feel what it's like. And I came in and I could feel the culture. I could feel the excitement. And that was incredibly important to me, because I know I can't be success unless I'm in a culture and environment that I'm happy in. I think it's harder with the pandemic and when there's industries that are not open to some
absolutely
open. It's much harder to get a feeling of what that culture is like, and it's much harder to make relationships if you're doing everything by Zoom.
Juliet, if I don't mind, Tony, one of the things, you're absolutely right as far as this virtual world. And so what I coach people, one of the questions to ask is, can you give me an example, or can you talk about what did you as a company do to support your employees' emotional well-being during a very, very difficult time in the world? Because you want to ask them, how did they react? What did they do? You might even want to ask, before the COVID, did they do something different? Because I think by that alone tells you a lot about what the company has done. And we all know companies that did not treat their employees well, and that's why they're leaving. And other companies that they've made a shift because they recognize that they need to hold on to them. So that culture question becomes an important thing.
Absolutely. So Joanne, you have had a very diverse career between academia, pharma, biotech, nonprofit. And I know we kind of touched a little bit on this before the call, but is there anything that you would have done differently in your career? And also, is there anything that you experienced in your career that you wish everybody was doing to move forward?
Yeah, so as I said, like, I think looking back is not so productive. I mean, I've learned something new in every one of my positions. So I would say thumbs up on that, because that's what you're doing. You're learning new things. So I'm a scientist, and, for scientists, and maybe for everybody, boredom is death, right? Like boredom is, I do not want to be bored. I want to be challenged. And that's one reason why change is fun, because it brings challenge and it brings excitement. And we thrive on that growth and development, right? So I guess all those things in some way contributed to my path. And so I don't regret any, and all of the positions that I had, almost everyone, including the one that I'm in now, was because of relationships, of knowing people. And I don't mean relationships like you have my card, I have your card. It means we probably did something together. We maintained a relationship. We did favors for one another. We got to know each other well enough that someone thought of me when the job came up, And so, and I haven't, I think that has been a cornerstone. So what would I do the same? I would do that. I would continue to, I don't think about networking as like, what can I get from people? I think about networking as what I can give them. And that's always been my mantra. How can I help you? And I have been repaid a million times, because of that. So opportunities come because people know you and they know what you're capable of. So.
Great. Juliet, switching over to a different question. How would you define success for yourself, and how have you kept yourself accountable reaching some of your career goals?
Yeah, so what is success? I mean, to me, success is it just if you find yourself in a place in life that you're happy. You know, if you're content and you're happy, I think then you've been successful. I think success is a funny word, and it means different things to different people. So to me, that's what it means. It means going a career at my own pace, and just being able to learn things in every position I've been in, and to make a difference. So that's how I define my own personal success, I guess. And the second part of the question was, how do I keep myself being accountable? Well, I think you're accountable to many people and many stakeholders. So you're accountable to your team, you're accountable to your boss, you're accountable to your goals in the company and the people that you matrix with in interdisciplinary teams. And I think the best way to stay accountable is to ask for feedback. I think I said this before, not asking the same person all the time, but a multitude of people a lot of the time. And if you keep hearing those same themes of places to improve, which may or may not be blind spots, you know, take action. Take action in those places that you need to improve the most. And then again, I also think mentors, we've heard this as a recurrent theme through this discussion, mentors are very important. Find a mentor and use them. And I do see a lot of people choosing mentors that are exactly like themselves. And I think they choose those mentors because they hear the things they want to hear. But I would say don't find a mentor like yourself. Choose a mentor that tells you something you don't want to hear. So I set up, you know, mentoring opportunities for my people in the different companies that I've worked for. And when they say, oh, I want this person to mentor me, and it's like, no, that person is exactly like yourself. Try and find somebody that sees the world in a different way. So that's how I think about accountability and making sure you remain accountable to your stakeholders.
Absolutely. Jane, we'll kind of go to you with a couple questions. We'll start with your definition of success and how you came to that definition.
Before I ask that one, I do want to answer the one about looking back. Okay. And this is actually something I wish that I learned earlier in my career, of letting go of, you know, we look for the approval from our peers. We look for the approval of our bosses. And if we don't get it sometimes, we can say, oh, it must not have been as good as it's supposed to be. Because I'm such a big acknowledgement and recognition, and I do for others, it's at times when it didn't come back, I would be disappointed. And I wish earlier in my career, I let go of that, because I knew I was good. I knew I did a great job, but somehow I wanted that from that boss. And Joanne, to your point, you know, yes, sometimes you have to teach those bosses. So I think that if there's anything of going back, it is, I would say, for everyone on this call, do the inner work. I did a lot of inner work late in my 20s, and I continue to do that exploration. That's where the best work comes. So I would encourage you to do that. So about the successes, early on in my career, I guess intuitively, I picked up what's important about our values and our self-beliefs. And I'm a big believer in creating foundations. And so my foundation of honesty, you know, integrity, we all have that integrity, but honesty is a very, very important part. And honesty meaning, you know, if you're going to ask me for feedback on it, I'm going to give it to you, and it might not be what you want to hear, but you asked me for it. So the keys to success is really so individualized. Mine has always been based on the values that I have set for myself, the values, my goals, and, you know, the failures that I don't like to even call them failures, you know, the pitfalls. And so the successes really come through really knowing yourself really well, and then finding the places where you can be successful. And I can say throughout my career, I have been blessed with, now I'm on my third career, and the third career is just as awesome as the first two, that I can count maybe on this hand, maybe on not this hand, of me loving to go to work every day, loving to go to work. But it took work to get there, because it was really always assessing and evaluating and moving around. And so success was always defined by those moments of time and finding that moment to achieve them.
Absolutely. And Jane, just to follow up on that, is there maybe one piece of practical advice that you would offer to a woman just starting out in her career? And is that the same piece of advice you would give to somebody that, you know, is a little more established or transitioning or?
Yep, great question. And my answer, especially for early career, and actually I had someone reach out to me today, and it was like my favorite email, and she was just graduated, and she wants to talk to someone about developing a plan. And so I would say for all of you that be a little bit more thoughtful about what you want to do next. But in the same token, what I would say to especially early career, don't worry that you don't know exactly what you want to do. My goodness me, part of what I bet you all of us have experienced is doing something that we didn't think we would do. So part of it is just the trial and the error. So I would let go of having that has to be something. But in the same token, you want to have career goals and develop a plan of what you want to do to find people to get there. So what I would encourage, it's going to be about relationships, you know, AKA networking, but it's really more about how do you develop those relationships, where you're going to develop them now, and you're going to call upon them when you need them. You know, Joanne, I know you feel that way, and Julia, it sounds as well. So early career professionals, develop a network. Mid-career professionals, if you haven't done it, continue to do it, because that's going to provide the value. And do not hesitate to ask for help. That is a common theme, that I don't like to ask for help. And for me, that has been one of the cornerstones of me in my career, that I have always been willing to ask for help. So that would be my pieces of advice.
Thank you, Jane. We have one final question for all of you before we jump into some of the chat questions, but I just want to remind everybody that you can pop questions in the chat. But the last question is, are there any questions we should be asking ourselves heading into 2022, maybe like the top 1, 2, 3 setting intentions for next year? Is there anything that can help us kind of start thinking and set ourselves up for next year?
Yeah, I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't follow up what Jane said with, I think there's one really important question you always have to be asking yourself, and that is, am I checking my biases? Because in the process of building relationships, of networking, you don't want to discount the people, because you do not know who you can help and who will be helpful to you. And we know that we all have biases. So I actually happen to know that all my years of doing women in science work, when I walk into a room, I look for the women. It's actually a problem for me. Like, there can be 3 women in a room of 400 people and I will find them. Okay. You know, and that's actually not practical. It's not a great, you know, there are men who are going to be helpful, and all genders can be helpful to one, you know. So I think being aware of your biases when you're doing relationship building, and it has it's so important in the workplace. We bring biases to our relationships with our coworkers. And so that's my life's work at this point. I've moved into DEI work because I've seen the importance of really having to check that. And I have seen examples over and over again of when I realize that I'm carrying a bias and I shed it, how that relationship has turned into something meaningful, valuable for me, for the other person. So that's my piece of advice. If you can work on that next year, everybody would do better.
Okay. Juliet?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, networking is so important, and building relationships and bridges with everybody, whoever they are. is going to be beneficial to everybody. It's going to be beneficial to everybody in the company at that point in time. It's going to be beneficial to you in 10 years time. And don't burn bridges either. You know, if there's conflicts, have constructive conflict. You're always going to have some conflict, but you can make that very constructive. So that's a piece of advice I would give. I would also say, and this is again about relationships, if you can get into the office and actually have, you know, physical, you know, face-to-face in real-time relationships with people, that's much more effective than on Zoom, much more.
Absolutely. Jane?
Yeah, you know, I guess I'm going to hit the trifecta here because I wrote a book about relationships. But so I guess I'll say to people on the call, if you are on here and say, oh, you know, if you're an introvert and you're saying, oh, I don't know how to develop relationships, I'll say, absolutely you can, because it's not about you. It's really about the other person. And we just can't stress that enough about that relationship. So if you don't know how to, then really develop that skill, because that's what it is. And that's where, especially for the young ones. What I'm also going to, since I have so many of us on the call today, and what this is my, I guess, my wish and my hope that for all of us, as far as the diversity, really acceptance, embracing, hold your opinions, be open-minded about it, and also do not underestimate the power of a thank you. One of the things that I have, unfortunately, I get sometimes saddened, is that when from the networking and the relationship building, that the follow-up of a thank you, I appreciate the time, is so valued. And that little extra effort can go a long way. So don't underestimate what's something that you can do that will affect someone. And so that's like the follow-up, which is real important, because relationships is everything.
Yeah. Jane, I think we had talked about this in one of the other calls, going back to the introvert thing, is that an introvert's strongest part of networking is being a listener and being a good one.
That's right.
Because I know I'm on the opposite end, and I can just be chatty, and then when somebody else is talking, sometimes your wheels are just turning about kind of the next thing or whatever. Absolutely. So I think introverts have that unlock.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And that's once they realize that you don't have to talk, you just have a couple of probing questions and you listen with your heart. Yeah, that's going to be the best gift and best relationship that you're going to have with anybody, is that you listen to me. So,
right. And you remembered it the next time. You could be like, oh, how was that trip to wherever?
That's exactly
people
right.
like feeling like that. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So that is all the questions I have. And right now it looks like there's only one question in the chat. So I'll run through that one real quick. This person said, all of this is really fantastic information, but in some ways I feel like it's a little bit of a wish list. For example, I did my PhD, and inclusion and recognition tend to not be a thing in academia. Unfortunately, it often tends to be the opposite. I would like to hear the panelists' opinions on this. And Joanne, you would probably be able to.
I mean, I spent, I've spent 30 years speaking with scientists about the pitfalls of academia. So there are good labs. There are. And I think one of the mistakes, if I could speak to every first-year grad student and use Jane's principles of interview. So I also have a webinar on the Agene site called How to Choose a Lab, which is about choosing a workplace as well. It's the questions you need to ask. And unfortunately, most grad students, like I did, I got lucky, but I went, wow, cool science. I want to be in your lab. And that was it for 6 years under a person who had ultimate power over me for 6 years, right? And so that whole system is broken. And I'm involved in a number of large scale efforts, the Future of Research, the Professional Development Hub, trying to change that system so that mentoring and recognition are intrinsic to the system. But that system is broken from a professional point of view, no doubt. So all I can do is look for that support, look for that mentoring group, watch my series on peer mentoring on iBiology, get a cohort to help you get through it and support you. and bring you that recognition and the rah-rah. We all need the rah-rah. We all need it, right?
Yes.
Because it's better, it gets better. And you will find colleagues that, and a great scientific career. So don't give up. And I would say acknowledge the weaknesses. I just want to put in one plug. If you are a woman that has been harassed or bullied in your training lab and you are looking for support to get through that crisis, please reach out to me. I'm involved in a confidential support group called Friends of Sarah that helps those type of women navigate that really treacherous situation. And it's a fantastic cohort of people to support you to reclaim your power. And so that's a horrible thing. And I'm sorry for the large number of women that unfortunately we are working with at this time. So
that's an amazing resource. Juliet or Jane, do you have any follow-up for that question? Well, Jane, I don't.
I'll leave that to Joanne.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've been fortunate. I've been in industry for 20 years, and I think every place that I've had has actually had good culture and very, very proactive for inclusion as much as possible. And I think it is getting better. And I'm certainly in a place now that thinks and takes it very, very seriously.
Awesome. Well, that is all I have for questions. And it looks like that's all there is for questions in the chat. So I think we can probably break out into our networking breakout rooms now, and everybody that is on the call, be sure to stay on at the end of all the breakout sessions, because we will be raffling off 6 copies of Jane's book, You, You, Me, You, and a pair of Apple iPods. So be sure you stay on here after the breakout rooms kind of wrap up. I believe there should be 3 of them. So ISPE, if you want to take it away, I think you're good to go. So next we have 6 of Jane's books to raffle off and a pair of AirPods. I know, yay, it's so exciting. And the winners, we put everybody in a spreadsheet, randomized, and did a random number picker. So the winners of the book are Caroline Rufo, Jamie Graham, Jan Hai, Courtney Smith, and Sylvia Bollier. So you guys,
Tony, you know what? I already have her book. So can you put it back in and give it to somebody?
Yeah, Beth, do you want to roll the
another
dice
name
again?
Yeah. Okay, hold on.
So Tony, is everybody back into the room? Is everybody back?
I think so, yep.
Okay.
What about number 16?
Cindy D.
All right, Cindy D.
Thank you.
You also won a book. And then the winner of the AirPods is Jennifer Zimmons.
Woo!
Congratulations.
Yeah, congrats everybody. Make sure that you send an email with your address. The office at ISPE will drop their email in the chat. It is office@ispeboston.com, I believe.
Yep.
Is that right? Perfect.
So wait, because I won the earpods. Hold on a second. That's great.
Congrats, Jennifer.
Congratulations.
They just put it in the chat, so you should be good to go. And then those will all be sent out next week. So
I'm in Canada, so is it okay to send to my address? I'm not in the States.
Okay, but we'll confirm, but that should be fine. I don't see an issue.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you. Awesome. Okay, so before we get into thank yous, Jane, Juliet, Joanne, do you guys have any closing remarks?
Great meeting, everybody. Feel free to reach out.
Yes, great meeting. Great to meet everybody. Loved answering all the questions and being involved in the discussion. And yeah, if anyone's in biotech and wants to apply to Chimera, I'm just give my plug. Great culture. Great culture.
Great, absolutely.
And actually, take her up on that, because a couple people asked me about job hunting. She just said, reach out to me. So do not be afraid.
Build that relationship.
Reach out to her on LinkedIn and say you saw her speak. She was awesome. And now you need a job.
in a place with a great culture.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
But
It's
I
all
would
full
say,
circle.
But I would say first get to know her before you ask for the job.
3 references.
Yeah,
There's time for
exactly.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, if, you know, for those of you on the call, I will say that I am so thrilled that I've been asked to come to speak to this group because I'm so impressed with the breakout rooms, the quality of the conversations, the work that you are doing beyond your daily work, and you're working on goals, and all of that is going to serve you well. And so if you linked in with all of us, any one of us, please make sure you put a personal note. LinkedIn, unfortunately, there is a place where you can just click and it just sends it. And there's a place where you can do the personal. And I would strongly encourage you, as part of relationship building, always send a personal note, because that's going to really set that first impression of like, wow, I really like this person because they took the time. So, and Tony, I want to commend you. You did a fabulous job facilitating this event. So let's give a round of applause for Tony.
Yes, Tony, thank you.
Yeah, we'll get a
There's
little
time for everything, right?
Yeah,
Top
you did a
of our
fabulous,
campaign.
Why you gotta do it?
fabulous job.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Joanne and Jane and Juliet. This has been awesome. And you've shared so much expertise and insight with us today. Also, thank you to everybody who joined today's session and for your interest and support in ISPE and Women in Bio and Women Accelerators. We will be sending out a follow-up email with a short survey. So we would obviously really appreciate your feedback and, you know, what kind of events you're looking for moving forward. And you'll also receive an email with a link for the recording from today. Once we chop out some of, you know, the side things, so, and thank you again to our dedicated sponsor, Elemental Machines, and Brooke, who couldn't be with us today. So on behalf of ISPE and our presenters and our co-sponsors, thank you again for joining us today. Hope everybody has a good night.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
Tony,
thank